All right, as we continue navigating our way through Havana, we were brought to this particular statue, but we were talking about some of the history and the indigenous people who was in Cuba before Christopher Columbus, before any enslaved came, before so basically the Spanish came and before the Africans came. Who was in Cuba?
Well, the first inhabitants we had in the islands, as is recorded, they were three main types of indigenous: the Guanatabeyes, Taínos, and Siboneyes. About 10,000 was the population of indigenous we had in Cuba when the Spaniards arrived. About 60 years later, zero. They were unallied because they were forced to work looking for gold, which we didn't have, and then worked in the plantations, and they have a very poor alimentation, which mainly consisted in corn, beans, just that. And then the European diseases like the Spanish flu, smallpox, and all that, so they couldn't survive. That's why today you don't see in Cuba traits of natives. So most Cubans look like white, like Black American, like Spanish, some of them Chinese, but no natives because they were totally unallied.
Really?
Yes.
So they were. So when the Spanish came, and and obviously they brought what all did the Spanish bring with them when they came?
Weapons to conquer.
Okay.
Remember, first they discovered the new continent for them, new continent.
Right, for them.
For them.
They discovered something, but people already here.
Yeah, they found out there were people, and then more people came to conquer what they discovered. They brought weapons.
Okay.
The indigenous population only had arrows and spears, and they had fire guns, and they have this metal, how can I say?
So armor, body armor.
Armor, so there was a rebellion. The most important rebellion was led by Atuey, who was from Dominican Republic, and there is a story that all Cubans know about. When he got caught, he was gonna be burned alive, and there was a priest there, and he was told, do you want to regret your sins so you can go to heaven? And he asked them, are these people gonna be there? And he said, of course. And then Atuey said, well, I don't want to go to heaven with all these murderers.
Whoa!
All Cubans don't know that story because Atuey was the first rebel we had in Cuba, and he was from Dominican Republic.
So what language did they speak before? I guess it was indigenous language. It was not, obviously it wasn't Spanish, and it wasn't English.
Each tribe had a different language. So Guanatabeyes, Taínos, and Siboney. And the language are named after each individual tribe. You can find some traits of the language they used back then. For instance, we have an instrument we call koa, which is like a long stick. We use it to dig a hole on the ground, and we still use the name koa. It came from those days. We have a typical Cuban food, which is made from yuca.
The yuca.
That is called casabe. That's another indigenous.
It's called cassava?
Casabe.
Cassave. You know they call cassava in West Africa.
Okay.
And cassava in the Caribbean and Jamaica and other places. And so that's interesting. So
another word, so most cigar smokers know is beique.
Beique.
Which is a cigar brand, type of cigar, and beique was like a shaman in the indigenous tribe.
Okay. Now, when the Spanish came, the Spanish brought with them the weapons. Well, what religion did they bring?
That also happened. They were forced to practice Catholicism.
They were forced to practice Catholicism.
As the slaves were too. So the African slaves were also forced to practice Catholicism, but in secret, they continue worshiping their own deities from the Yoruba pantheon. That's how the syncretism happened in Cuba. For instance, Santa Barbara, Saint Barbara, when they were worshiping Saint Barbara, what Spaniards thought they were worshiping was Saint Barbara, but Africans were worshiping Shango, who was a different deity for them. But because they were forced to practice these religions, they did that. They disguised their own religions beneath the other Spaniards' religions, like Catholicism.
You know, that's interesting because when I went to Brazil, the same story, exact. Although the Portuguese are in Brazil, so the Spanish are not there. The Portuguese are there, but the Yoruba, the practice of that religion.
Yes.
The same story. They said they had to hide it.
Yeah, they wanted to preserve their traditions.
Yes, and so those traditions are still present here in Cuba?
Yes, very present.
But Catholicism is like the number one?
Catholicism is still number one.
Okay, and why do you think it's number one? Do you think it's that people don't know, or is it just...
People still believing in that one God, and I think the Catholic Church is well represented, you know. And something very important happened in Cuba in 1998, and it's the visit of the Pope John Paul II. You know, being a communist country, I say communist because the name of the party is communist, but we never got to be really communist. But the revolutionary government led by Fidel Castro was against church, against religion. At the beginning, very hard. If you were part of the Cuban Communist Party, you couldn't practice any religions. But that changed in 1998 when the Pope visited Cuba. The revolutionary government opened up to religions, and now people practice any religion very openly. And because of that visit of the Pope, the faith on the Catholic Church was raised.
So people saw it and they said, well, this may be something that's positive.
Yes.
Because of Pope John II and what happened then. Okay, very interesting. And so you say they also have Protestant religions here also?
Yes.
What are some others? Are there Anglicans here? Anglican? Maybe not. Anglican is another denomination.
We have some Jewish in Havana. We have
Jewish,
some, I think there are 3 synagogues in Havana.
Okay.
And a very small population of Jewish people in Havana.
Okay.
We also have a mosque in the old town, but it's mainly visited by the staff from the embassies from the countries that practice their religion.
Okay. So it's very interesting because when I travel the world, I see recurring themes.
Yes.
And that's what I see when I go different places. I was like, wow, this is, you know, when you were talking about the indigenous people, then obviously you have, whether it's Spanish came to Cuba,
yes,
the French went to Haiti, but then the Spanish went to Dominican Republic.
Yes.
And so you see all of the different players, and the British went to Cayman Islands and Bahamas and Jamaica.
Yeah, you can see that then in the culture of the country.
And you see it, but it's something that's interesting though. Wherever I go, the African culture somehow still comes through. You still see
they were good preserving their roots.
Yeah.
And that's very important. You gotta know where you come from to know where you have to go.
That's right. All right, well, we're here in Havana and Cuba. And guess what? As a part of a Maximum Impact Travel Experience, we'll tell you how you can join us here. And you may have an opportunity to meet Pedro as well, because Pedro, he's obviously, you'll get a chance to see what he's doing as far as the DNA is concerned, but he's also taking me around the town and showing me everything that's going on, and a great guide, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And so we're going to continue to learn more about this fascinating country of Cuba. More on the way.
So this side of the city we see here, the nearest of us, just in front of us, that's the old town, Habana Vieja, which is over 500 years old, and that's where the city was founded. Over there we have the cruise ship terminal, the Golden Dome we see over there.
Oh, cruise ships come here?
Yeah, cruise ships. When Obama opened up, that was the fastest or the best way Americans will come to Cuba, through cruise ships.
Do they still come?
No, not anymore, because there was the cruise ships company, Havana Harbor, was sued, because you know everything belongs to the government here.
Okay.
Now, and because of that, the problem now, no cruise ships are coming.
Okay.
So we have the cruise ship terminal over there, the Catholic Russian Orthodox Church over there. The old Golden Dome is the Capitol building. Okay. As we move farther to the west, is the newer side of the city.
Over here, where we see the buildings going on.
Yes.
Okay. And then over here, you have a fort, right?
There we have one of the largest and the most expensive fortress built in the whole continent, La Cabaña. In front of us, is what we call La Casa del Che, the House of El Che.
Okay.
And it's a place El Che Guevara used as a, how can I say, headquarters at the beginning of the revolution, and today it's a museum.
So in 1962, something happened here in Cuba, and we've heard about it for years, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
So in Cuba we know it as La Crisis de Octubre, October crisis. Every other country in the world a missile crisis, because nuclear missiles were brought to Cuba. You can see some replicas of the nuclear missiles that the Soviets brought to Cuba. And over there you can see the remains of a U-2 airplane that was shot down in Holguín province by the Russian battery. So that incident almost caused a nuclear war, because there was no point back then in shutting down the plane, because they already knew every single location of the ramps, the military bases displayed over the country. But what happened is that this Russian battery lost communication with the headquarters in Havana, the main headquarters. So the orders back then in the Russian army is, if you lose communication, the higher ranked officer takes control. And he decided to shut down the U-2, which was a big mistake, because there was...
Whose plane was that, the U-2?
The U-2 was an American spy airplane that was flying over Cuban space.
So it was an American plane that was shot down by the Soviets?
Yes, in Holguín province, that is located on the eastern side of the country.
Okay, was the pilot or the pilots, were they killed?
Yes,
They were
pilot
killed.
was killed.
And so these are the remains of the American jet that was shot down.
Yes.
And these here are, these actual or replicas?
Those are replicas.
Okay, replicas of Russian or Soviet?
Soviet nuclear weapons.
Okay.
Or missiles.
Missiles up top here.
Then part of the anti-craft that was displayed all over Cuba to fight the American airplanes, and Russian jet fight.
Oh, so that's
fighter.
A replica of a Russian jet fighter?
No, that's an actual.
Oh, that's an actual one right there?
Yes.
Okay, and so what are the replicas? Those are replicas?
The replicas are the missiles, only the missiles.
Okay, but all
these
of this
are
is
real,
actuals.
real weapons.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Fascinating history. I've always heard about the Cuban Missile Crisis. You know how it's framed in America. So when you come here, you have a chance to hear it a little bit differently, but it's, you actually have a chance to see the remains of the fighter jet that was shot down, and which almost led to World War III and a nuclear war.
None of us would be here now.
No, none of us would definitely not be here had that happened in 1962.
Scary.
Yeah, and it's good that it didn't happen. All right, more on the way from Cuba.